Claire Miller had never had it easy. At 22, accustomed to surviving on a string of odd jobs, she saw her chance in a job posting at a massive international corporation in downtown Chicago. It was one of those companies with glass towers that loomed over the city like modern castles, inaccessible to ordinary people. That morning, when she woke up in her small apartment on the south side, she felt her heart pounding like a hammer. In front of the mirror, which reflected the cracks in the wall, she tried on the only white blouse she owned. She had washed it the night before and dried it over the radiator all night. It still smelled of dampness and cheap detergent from the corner store. "Claire, remember who you are," she whispered to herself, touching a small scar on her hand, a memento from when she helped her mother clean offices as a child. Her mother always used to say, "Sweetheart, a person isn't measured by where they came from, but by where they're going." The Thermita 6 bus was packed, as always, at 7 in the morning. Claire stood by the window, watching Chicago wake up. Pedestrians in elegant coats, holding disposable coffee cups, hurried to their offices. She wanted to be one of them. She wanted to belong to that world where people had purpose, stability, respect. But fate seemed to mock her dreams. When the bus stopped in the middle of the loop, the engine started smoking. The driver announced that everyone had to get off. Claire glanced at her watch. She had only half an hour until her interview, and it was still a 15-minute ride to the office. "No, not now," she whispered, feeling her stomach clench with nerves. She started to run. Her only pair of black, low-heeled shoes, bought at a thrift store, squeaked with every step. People looked back at her with curiosity or irritation. After 10 minutes of running, when she was almost there, she heard an ominous snap. The strap on her right shoe broke. She stood in the middle of Michigan Avenue, holding the broken shoe in her hand. Cars sped around her, horns blaring, a crowd of indifferent pedestrians flowing past. She was alone in this huge city, with a broken shoe, sweaty, her hair a mess, but she didn't give up. She took off both shoes, held them in her hands, and ran the rest of the way barefoot on the cold asphalt. "Do you realize you're in downtown Chicago?" A man's voice full of contempt sounded behind her. She turned, still panting. In front of her stood a man in his 40s, in a perfectly tailored suit, a luxury watch gleaming on his wrist. His shoes shone like mirrors, and his hair was styled with surgical precision. He looked at her like an exotic animal that had accidentally escaped from the zoo. "I'm sorry, I was in a hurry," Claire stammered, feeling her cheeks burn with shame. "This place isn't for everyone," the man said, clearly enjoying the situation. "Maybe you should learn to walk in shoes before you try to play in the major leagues." Claire stood in silence, her bare feet on the cold concrete, clutching her broken shoes. She wanted to answer him, but the words stuck in her throat. This man radiated a confidence she lacked. He carried himself like someone who had never had to run for a bus or count pennies at the end of the month. "Have a nice day," he added with a sarcastic smile, and walked toward the same skyscraper Claire was headed for. Her heart stopped. Was it possible? Did this arrogant man work at the very company she was applying to? For a moment, she considered turning back, going home to her safe but mediocre life. But no, she gritted her teeth, walked into a small shoe store on the corner, and used her last few dollars to buy the cheapest black flats in her size. They were tight and uncomfortable, but at least she could walk in them. In the elevator heading to the 27th floor, Claire watched her reflection in the mirrored doors. She looked like a girl who had just run through a storm. Her hair was disheveled, her face showed traces of exhaustion, and her new blouse was already wrinkled. But in her eyes, a strange fire burned, a determination that grew with every obstacle. The receptionist, a young woman with perfect makeup, looked down at her. "Claire Miller, for the specialist position interview?" she asked, her tone suggesting it must be a mistake. "Yes, that's me," Claire replied, straightening her shoulders. "Please have a seat in the waiting area. The director will be with you shortly." The waiting area looked like a modern art museum. Leather armchairs, glass tables with copies of Harvard Business Review and the Wall Street Journal. Claire sat on the very edge of an armchair, afraid of damaging it. Around her sat other candidates, all in perfect suits, with degrees from prestigious universities, probably fluent in 3 languages, and with fathers in high-powered positions. One of them, a blonde with a cold gaze, was loudly talking on the phone about her internship in London. Another was reviewing notes in 4 languages. Claire felt like an imposter at a ball for the aristocracy. But then she remembered the words of her grandmother, Helen, who had grown up during the Great Depression. "Honey, don't ever let anyone tell you you're worth less because of where you come from. Sometimes the brightest diamonds are found in the mud." The office door swung open, and Claire looked up. Her heart stopped. Standing in the doorway was the same man who had ridiculed her on the street just a short while ago. He now wore a nameplate that read, "Henry Washington, CEO." Their eyes met for a fraction of a second. Surprise flickered in his, then amusement. The smile that spread across his face was full of ironic satisfaction. "Ms. Claire Miller," he asked, as if her name tasted like a good joke on his tongue. "Please, come in." Claire stood up, feeling her legs tremble under the weight of the situation. Every step toward his office was like walking to the gallows. She knew she had already lost before she even began. This man had already judged her, already made his decision. She would just have to go through the farce of this interview before hearing a polite rejection. But as she crossed the threshold of his office, another voice echoed in her head, the voice of her mother, who had spent her life cleaning the offices of rich people but never allowed herself to be humbled. "Claire, you are my daughter, and my daughter never kneels." Chapter 2. Henry Washington's office was a fortress of success. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the Willis Tower, and the walls were covered with diplomas from prestigious universities and photos with important figures. Behind a large mahogany desk sat the man who held her future in his hands, and she had stood before him barefoot on the street, humiliated with broken shoes. "Please have a seat," Henry said, gesturing to the leather chair opposite his desk. His voice was calm, but Claire detected a note of amusement in it. "I must admit, that was an unusual first impression." Claire sat up straight, clasping her hands on her knees. She could feel the new flats pinching her feet, but she didn't allow herself to grimace in pain. "Mr. Washington, I apologize for the commotion on the street," she began, looking him directly in the eye. "I realize my first impression wasn't the best." "Indeed," Henry agreed, opening her resume on his pristine desk. "I see you graduated from the University of Illinois, Chicago, economics, a GPA of 3.9. Impressive." He ran his finger down the page as if searching for something specific. "And your professional experience." He paused. "Working at a deli, waitressing at a pizzeria in Lincoln Park, packing boxes in a warehouse. Is that all?" Claire felt the blood rush to her face, but she didn't look away. "Yes, that's all. But each of those jobs taught me something important. At the deli, I learned how to talk to people. At the pizzeria, how to work under pressure. And in the warehouse, organization and precision." "I see." Henry set down the resume and leaned back in his chair. "So why our firm? Why Washington and Partners?" This was the question Claire had prepared for weeks, but now, looking into the eyes of the man who had humiliated her just minutes ago, all her rehearsed answers felt false. "Because I'm hungry," she said finally. Henry raised an eyebrow. "I'm sorry? I'm hungry for success, hungry for opportunity, hungry for a chance to show who I really am," Claire explained, feeling the words flow naturally from her. "People born into privilege often don't understand what it means to fight for every single day. I do, and that's why I won't waste a single opportunity." Henry looked at her for a long time, silent. Something new appeared in his eyes. Curiosity. "Tell me about a time you had to solve a difficult problem under pressure." Claire closed her eyes for a moment, recalling a day from a year ago. "I was working as a waitress at Mamma Mia's Pizzeria in Lincoln Park. It was a Saturday night. The place was packed, and the main pizza oven broke down. The owner, Mr. Mark, started to panic. Customers were complaining, some were leaving. The entire weekend's revenue was at risk." Henry leaned forward, listening intently. "I went into the kitchen and saw the problem was a broken seal, but there was no way to replace it in the middle of the weekend. I had an idea. In the basement, there were 2 small electric ovens the owner only used for experimenting with new recipes. I organized a system. Half the kitchen staff made smaller pizzas in the electric ovens, and the other half prepared cold appetizers and salads that weren't on the menu before. And how did it end? The customers loved the new, intimate format of the pizza. We called them family-style pizzas. Boss, the owner, sold more that night than on a normal weekend, and the new menu items became permanent." For the first time since the interview began, Henry looked genuinely intrigued. "Ms. Miller, do you realize where you're applying? This isn't a pizzeria in Lincoln Park. This is a firm that manages an investment portfolio worth $200 million. Our clients are bank presidents, retail chain owners, politicians. One mistake can cost millions." "I know," Claire replied calmly. "But do you realize, Mr. Washington, that my whole life I couldn't afford to make mistakes? When you only have one shot, you learn to be perfect out of necessity, not choice." Henry stood up and walked to the window. He stared out at the city sprawling below for a long time. "You know, Ms. Miller, there's a part of me that thinks this interview is a waste of time. Someone like you—" He paused, searching for the right words. "You don't fit in at our firm." Claire felt her heart sink into her stomach. This was it, the end of her dream. "But there's also a part of me that's curious," Henry continued, still not looking at her, curious if someone with your kind of determination could surprise us. He turned to her abruptly. "You've got the job, Ms. Miller." For a moment, Claire thought she had misheard. "What?" "You've got the client services specialist position. Base salary of $4,500 a month, plus performance bonuses. You start Monday at 8 a.m. Claire sat motionless, unable to believe what she was hearing. She felt tears welling up in her eyes, but forced them back with sheer will. "Why?" she asked in a whisper. Henry returned to his desk and sat down. "Because in 10 years in this industry, I've seen hundreds of candidates with perfect resumes, great schools, wealthy families. Most of them are pampered kids who don't know the value of hard work. But you're like a hungry wolf. And sometimes a wolf like that can do more than a whole pack of well-bred dogs." Claire rose from her chair, still in disbelief. "Just one thing, Ms. Miller," Henry added, looking at her intently. "There's no room for sentimentality in this firm. Only results matter. If you don't measure up, no one will hold your hand. Do we understand each other?" "We understand each other," Claire replied, her voice gaining strength. "Excellent. I'll introduce you to the team on Monday. See you then." As Claire left the office, her legs felt like jelly. In the waiting room, the same candidates were still sitting there, with the same self-assured expressions. They had no idea that the girl in the cheap flats had just landed the job they were all vying for. In the elevator on her way down, Claire finally allowed herself a smile. It was the smile of a girl who had been told her whole life that she wasn't good enough, not educated enough, not elegant enough, and now for the first time someone, even for reasons she couldn't quite fathom, had given her a chance. When she stepped out of the building onto Michigan Avenue, the sun was shining brighter than it had that morning. The pedestrians were still rushing, but now she was one of them. She had a job in downtown Chicago in a glass tower, with a salary she could only have dreamed of a week ago. But deep down, she also felt a sense of unease. Henry Washington was not a man who did anything without a reason, and after their meeting, she knew it wasn't a reason she was going to like. Chapter 3. Monday morning began for Claire at 5:30. She rose in the darkness of her small South Side apartment, where the only decoration was a photograph of her mother on the dresser next to her bed. She chose the better of the 2 skirts she owned and the same white blouse from Friday, only this time meticulously ironed. On the Number 6 bus, the same one that had failed her on the day of the interview, she looked at her reflection in the window. In 2 hours, she would be sitting at her own desk in downtown Chicago. The thought still felt unreal, like a dream she could wake up from at any moment. At 8 a.m., the Washington and Partners building was buzzing with life. Dozens of people in elegant suits milled about the lobby, holding Starbucks coffees, talking animatedly about projects, contracts, and client meetings. Claire felt like an intruder at a party she hadn't been invited to. The receptionist from Friday, Agnes, smiled at her much more warmly than before. "Good morning, Claire. Mr. Washington is expecting you. You'll be working in the client services department on the 26th floor." In the elevator, Claire met 2 middle-aged men discussing their weekend golf games at a club in Lake Forest. One of them, a heavy-set man with a cherubic face and an exceptionally expensive watch, glanced at her with curiosity. "New?" he asked. "Yes, I start today," Claire replied. "Good luck," said the other, a tall, bald man. "Client services is no place for the weak, especially with Ms. King." The name was spoken with a tone that was clearly a warning. Claire wanted to ask who Ms. King was, but the elevator had already stopped at her floor. The Client Services Department occupied the entire 26th floor. It was an open-plan office with a dozen workstations, each equipped with a modern computer, 2 monitors, and a phone. People in elegant attire sat at their desks, talking to clients through headsets in 3 languages, English, Spanish, and German. "Ms. Miller, I presume?" Claire turned to see a woman in her mid-30s with jet black hair pulled back in a perfect bun, wearing a suit that probably cost more than Claire earned in 6 months. Her makeup was flawless, and her nails were painted a dark blood red. "Yes, I'm Claire Miller. Veronica King, Director of Operations." The woman introduced herself without offering her hand. "Mr. Washington told me about your unusual background." The way she said the word background made Claire feel like an exotic animal at the zoo. "Come, I'll show you where you'll be working." Veronica strode through the office like a queen surveying her domain. Her heels clicked rhythmically on the floor, and every employee they passed nodded with a mixture of respect and fear. "Here you are, your desk," Veronica said, pointing to a desk in the farthest corner of the office, by a window overlooking the grey wall of the adjacent building. "The computer is already set up. Your password is New Employee 2025. Claire sat down, smelling the new furniture and window cleaner. A list of tasks for her first day was already waiting on the monitor. "Since you're new to this industry," Veronica continued, standing behind Claire's chair. I decided to give you something simple to start with. Please prepare a report on client satisfaction from the last quarter. The data is in the CRM system. You need to analyze it, create a trend graph, and write a 2-page summary with your conclusions. Claire opened the system, and her heart sank. This wasn't just data. It was a database containing thousands of records in 3 different formats in 2 languages, with incomplete information and errors in the dates. When is this due? She asked. By the end of the day, Veronica replied with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. It shouldn't take more than a few hours, right? Claire looked at the monitor again. Even an experienced analyst would need at least 3 days to properly analyze such a mess of data. Of course, she said calmly. Excellent. Veronica tapped her nail on the desk. Oh, and one more thing. While preparing the report, please answer the phones simultaneously. The client line cannot be left unattended. When Veronica walked away, Claire felt like a soldier thrown onto a battlefield without a weapon. But this wasn't the first impossible situation she had faced. When she was 16, she had to care for her sick grandmother for a week, all while studying for her finals and working afternoons at a grocery store. She took a deep breath and got to work. The first few hours were a nightmare. The phone rang every 10 minutes. Clients had complicated questions about their investment portfolios, and the data in the system seemed to have been organized by someone with an obsession for chaos. Veronica walked past her desk every hour, dropping comments like, "How's that report coming along? I hope there won't be any problems." At 1 o'clock, as Claire was trying to find some logic in an Excel sheet with third-quarter data, a young man approached her desk. "Hi, I'm Martin Kowalski from IT," he introduced himself quietly. "Heard it's your first day." "Yeah," Claire replied, not taking her eyes off the monitor. "And probably my last." Martin glanced at her screen and whistled softly. "This database? That's 6 months of incomplete data that no one wanted to clean up. The last guy who tried to analyze it quit after 2 days. But they told me to get it done by the end of the day," Claire said, her voice trembling slightly. Martin looked around, made sure Veronica was far away, and leaned in closer to Claire. "Listen, I shouldn't be doing this, but," he whispered, "I wrote a script once that can clean up data like this automatically. It'll take half an hour instead of 6, but this stays between us, okay?" Claire looked at him gratefully. "Why are you helping me?" "Because I know what it's like to be new, and because I can see you really want to work here. Not like all these others." He gestured discreetly toward the other employees, who got here because of their dad's connections. For the next hour, Martin helped Claire clean the data and create a basic analysis. The report that was supposed to be her downfall slowly took the shape of a professional document. "When you're done, print it in color," Martin advised. "Veronica loves it when things look expensive." At 5 o'clock, when most of the office had emptied out, Claire approached Veronica's office with the finished report. The director of operations was still at her desk, reviewing some documents under a desk lamp. "Here you are, the client satisfaction report," Claire said, placing the 15-page color-bound document on her desk. Veronica looked up, clearly surprised. "You finished?" "Yes. I also added a comparative analysis with our competitors and 3 proposals for improving service quality." Veronica took the report and scanned it in silence for several minutes. Claire could see her expression gradually change from surprise to something that could only be described as rage masked by professionalism. "Please, sit down," Veronica said finally. Claire sat in the chair opposite the desk. "Ms. Miller," Veronica began, setting the report aside, "do you realize this task was meant to be a test for you?" "A test?" "A test to see if you could recognize when a task is beyond your capabilities and ask for help instead of pretending you can handle it." Claire stared at her in silence, not understanding where this conversation was going. "You see, in our company there's no room for lone heroes. We have procedures, a hierarchy, rules for collaboration, and you, instead of focusing on one simple task, created," she waved her hand toward the report, "this." "But the report is finished," Claire said quietly. "Finished?" Veronica laughed coldly. "Ms. Miller, tomorrow at 9 a.m., you have a presentation in front of the company's board. You will be presenting your analysis to Mr. Kowalski, Mr. Green, and of course Mr. Washington. If a single number is wrong, if a single conclusion is flawed, our entire department will look like amateurs." Claire felt the blood drain from her face. "Tomorrow, but Tomorrow," Veronica repeated firmly. "That will be your real test, Ms. Miller. We'll see if that determination you talked so much about during your interview is enough when you're standing in front of people who can destroy not only you but our entire company with one bad word." Chapter 4. Claire didn't sleep that night. She sat at the small table in her kitchen, surrounded by printed spreadsheets and notes. preparing for the presentation that could decide her future. On the dresser nearby, her grandmother Helen's old alarm clock ticked away, counting down every second until morning. At 5 a.m., as the sky over the south side slowly turned grey, Claire finally put down her pen. She knew every number in the report by heart. She knew that 72% of the firm's clients were satisfied with the service, that the biggest problems were with phone wait times, and that competitors were using modern chatbot systems that Washington and Partners was ignoring. By 7:30, she was at the office. The building was still empty except for the security guard, Mr. George, who nodded at her as she entered. "You're in early today," he noted. "Big day," Claire replied, trying to hide her nerves. In the elevator, riding up to the 27th floor conference room, her heart pounded like a drum. Through the glass doors, she saw a long table where 5 men in expensive suits were already seated. Henry Washington was among them, but he looked different now than during the interview, more formal, more unapproachable. "Ms. Miller," said one of the men, the heavy-set one from the elevator, as she entered the room. "I'm Thomas Kowalski, Vice President of Finance. We hear you've prepared an analysis of client satisfaction." "Yes, gentlemen," Claire said, laying out her printouts on the table, her hands trembling slightly. Veronica entered the room right after her, carrying a tablet and looking like a predator that smells blood. "Gentlemen, as I mentioned earlier," Veronica began, "Ms. Miller is a new employee with no experience in this industry. This presentation is her first real test." Claire looked at her, finally understanding the trap. Veronica didn't want to test her. She wanted to publicly humiliate her in front of the board. She wanted to show Henry that his strange experiment with the girl from the streets was doomed to fail. "Let's begin," said the second man, Stanley Green, Director of Development. Claire took a deep breath. "Gentlemen, our client satisfaction rate is currently at 72%. This means that nearly 1 in 3 clients is not fully satisfied with our services." She displayed the first chart. "The problem isn't the quality of our investment products. Those are competitive. The problem lies in the accessibility and quality of our communication." "Specifically," Kowalski asked, "the average wait time to connect with a consultant is 8 minutes and 20 seconds. In this day and age, that's an eternity. Clients hang up after 3 minutes and call our competitors." Henry watched her intently, but his face was unreadable. "Secondly," Claire continued, "our procedures are complicated for the average person. We use technical language that someone without a background in economics doesn't understand. Meanwhile, 60% of our clients are over 50 and need simple, clear explanations." "And what do you propose?" Green asked. "3 things. Claire showed the next slide. "First, a callback system. Instead of waiting on hold, a client leaves their number, and we call them back within half an hour. Second, simplifying the language in our materials. Third, short instructional videos on YouTube to show clients how to use our online system." Silence fell in the room. The men looked at the charts and numbers Claire had prepared. "How much would this cost?" Kowalski asked. "The callback system software costs about $50,000 plus 1 additional employee. But the savings? If we retain even 20% of the clients who are currently leaving due to poor service, we'll gain about $500,000 in a year." Henry shifted in his chair and spoke for the first time during the presentation. "How do you know how much that software costs?" Claire felt all eyes focus on her. "Last night, I called 3 companies that specialize in these types of systems. I asked for preliminary quotes. I said I was from Washington and Partners and that we were considering an upgrade." Veronica turned pale. "Are you aware that you are not authorized to conduct business discussions on behalf of the company?" she asked sharply. "I didn't present myself as a decision-maker," Claire replied calmly. "I only asked for approximate costs for a firm of our size." "But still—" "Veronica," Henry interrupted her. "Let her finish the presentation." Claire continued for the next 15 minutes, discussing every aspect of her analysis. She showed how competitors were dealing with similar problems, what the trends in customer service were across the financial industry, and even proposed a pilot program to test the new solutions on 100 clients. When she finished, there was a profound silence in the room. "That's all," Claire said, gathering her papers. Kowalski looked at Green. Green looked at Henry. The tension in the air was palpable. "Ms. Miller," Henry finally spoke, "can you explain where you got the data on our competitors? From their websites and annual reports, it's all publicly available." "And these proposed solutions?" Claire hesitated for a moment. "These are ideas that came to me when I was working as a waitress. I saw how small business owners handle customer service problems. Sometimes the best solutions don't come from business textbooks, but from real contact with people." Henry nodded and looked at the other board members. "Gentlemen, could we have a moment alone?" Claire and Veronica left the room. In the hallway, through the glass doors, they could see the men gesturing animatedly and talking in raised voices. Veronica stood next to Claire, radiating an icy fury. "A very inventive presentation," Veronica said finally, not looking at Claire. "Especially the part about calling outside vendors. Some might call that overstepping your authority, but others might call it initiative," Claire replied quietly but firmly. Veronica turned to her abruptly. "Miss Miller, you've been here for 1 day. 1 day. Do you think you can fight me with my experience, my position in this company?" "I don't want to fight anyone," Claire said. "I just want to do my job well." "Your job?" Veronica laughed dryly. "Your job is to answer phones and prepare simple reports, not company growth strategy." The conference room doors opened. Henry came out first, his expression unreadable. "Ms. Miller," he addressed her, "congratulations. The board has decided to implement your proposals on a pilot basis. You will coordinate the entire project." Claire felt as if the ground had been pulled out from under her, but this time, in a good way. "Me? But I just started." "That's why," Henry said with a mysterious smile. "Sometimes a fresh perspective is worth more than 10 years of routine." As Henry walked away, Claire was left alone with Veronica. The director of operations stood in silence for a moment, clutching her tablet so tightly her knuckles turned white. "This isn't over, Ms. Miller," she said at last, her voice very quiet. "This is just the beginning." Chapter 5. The next 2 weeks were a roller coaster for Claire. Her pilot project began to show its first results. The average phone wait time dropped from 8 minutes to 3, and the number of satisfied clients increased by 15%. Each day brought new challenges, but also new successes. Claire was moved to a larger desk closer to the center of the office. She now sat next to Bart, a senior specialist with 10 years of experience, who had initially eyed her with suspicion, but eventually came to appreciate her ingenuity. "You know, Claire," he said one morning, sipping coffee from the machine, "at first I thought you were here because of connections, but I see you really have a head for this business." But not all the changes were positive. Veronica became even more icily polite, which was worse than open hostility. She assigned Claire extra tasks for her development, which meant 12-hour workdays. She checked her every email, every report, every phone call with clients. "How's our star performer doing?" she would ask with a sarcastic smile as she passed Claire's desk. One Thursday evening, when Claire was alone in the office finishing a monthly report on the new system's effectiveness, 3 men in dark suits entered the department. She recognized Mr. Kowalski from the board, but the others were strangers. They had the faces of men accustomed to making million-dollar decisions. She hid behind a structural column and inadvertently overheard their conversation with Henry, who had just come out of his office. "Henry, we need to talk," said the most elegant of the men, with silver hair and a voice that sounded like a radio announcer. "The supervisory board is not pleased with these personnel experiments." "What are you talking about, Zachary?" Henry replied, but Claire detected tension in his voice. "About this girl, Miller. Stanley from HR says you hired her without standard procedures, no assessment center, no psychometric tests. Her results speak for themselves," Henry defended. "Henry," Kowalski chimed in, "the firm can't afford social experiments. We have a reputation to protect. Our clients expect professionalism from us, not social mobility for waitresses." Claire felt the blood freeze in her veins. "The social experiment? Is that what they thought of her? Zachary, that waitress has increased client satisfaction by 15% in 2 weeks, Henry said. "Yes, we've heard," the silver-haired man replied. "But have you considered how our long-term employees feel about this? People who have spent years studying, gaining experience, building a reputation. Suddenly, a girl from the streets comes in and gets a promotion in 2 weeks. It's unfair to the entire organizational culture," added the third man. "Team morale is dropping." Henry was silent for a long time. "Give her another month," he said finally. "If she doesn't measure up, she'll leave on her own." "A month is too long," Zachary said firmly. 2 weeks. And if she does anything at all that could harm the company, we end this experiment immediately." After the men left, Claire sat hidden behind the column, feeling her world crumble. A social experiment. Henry hadn't hired her because he believed in her abilities. He had hired her out of curiosity, like a funny little pet he wanted to observe in a new environment. The tears she had fought back for 2 weeks finally broke through. She sat in the empty office, surrounded by the glow of the motion-activated lights, and cried quietly at her desk. "Claire?" She turned around sharply. It was Martin from IT, with a laptop under his arm and a cup of coffee in his hand. "Sorry, I didn't know anyone was still here," he said, then noticed her red eyes. "Hey, is everything okay?" Yeah, everything's fine," she said quickly. wiping her tears with her sleeve. Martin put down his laptop and sat in the chair next to her. It doesn't look like everything's fine. What happened? For a moment, Claire debated whether to tell him, but she was so tired of pretending she had everything under control. I just found out I'm just an experiment, she said quietly. Henry didn't hire me because he thinks I'm right for the job. He hired me out of curiosity. Martin was silent for a moment, sipping his coffee. You know what I think? He said finally. Maybe it was an experiment at first, but does that matter? Clients aren't calling you because you're an experiment. They're calling because you solve their problems. But they want to fire me, Claire whispered. Who wants to fire you? The supervisory board. They gave Henry 2 weeks. Martin looked at her intently. Claire, can we trust each other? She nodded. Good, because I want to show you something. But this stays between us, deal? Martin opened his laptop and connected to the VPN. I've been working at this company for 5 years. For most of that time, I've just been the invisible guy who fixes computers. But you see, when you're invisible, people act around you like you don't exist. He showed her a folder on the network drive. For the last 6 months, Veronica has been asking me for technical support on various projects. Officially, it was about creating reports, performance analyses, that sort of thing. But I saw what she was really doing. He opened the first file. This is the original report on the loss from an investment in Riverbend Development stock. The company lost $500,000. The person responsible for that decision was Veronica. It was her choice, her analysis, her mistake. Then he opened a second file. And this is the same documentation after Veronica's revisions. Look who's now listed as the person responsible for the flawed analysis. Claire read her own name on a document she had never seen before. That's impossible, she whispered. I wasn't even working here then. Veronica was preparing for your arrival before you were even hired, Martin explained. She knew Henry was planning some experiment with a new employee, and she prepared a scapegoat. Claire stared at the screen, a nauseous feeling growing in her stomach. Are there more documents like this? Yes, Martin scrolled through the folder. A flawed analysis of the housing market from February, for which you are officially responsible. An incorrect credit risk assessment for the Metalex client, also signed with your name. In total, about $1 million in losses that Veronica will try to pin on you when she gets the chance. But these are forgeries. Yes, but in the computer system, they'll look authentic. Veronica has administrator access to most of our databases. She can change dates, authors, anything she wants. Claire leaned against her desk, feeling her legs give way. What do I do? She asked helplessly. Martin thought for a moment. I can archive the original files, so Veronica won't know anyone has them. That will be your insurance. But you have to be very careful. If Veronica finds out you know something, she'll accelerate her plan. But why are you helping me? Claire asked. You could get in trouble for this. Martin closed his laptop and looked out the window at the Chicago nightscape. Because for 5 years, no one in this company noticed I existed. No one remembered my name. No one thanked me for my work. And you, on your first day, when I was helping you with the data, you said, "Thank you so much, Martin." And you used my name. It might seem like a small thing, but for someone who's been invisible for 5 years, I understand, Claire said softly. Besides, Martin added with a half-smile, I don't like blatant injustice. And what Veronica is planning to do is exactly that. When Claire left the office that evening, the streetlights were already on. She walked slowly, in no hurry to get home. She needed time to think. In her pocket was a flash drive with copies of the original documents, her only defense against what was to come. On the bus back to the south side, she watched her reflection in the window. The same girl who had run barefoot through the city streets 2 weeks ago now knew how the world of big business worked. She knew that the worst enemies weren't those who attacked you openly, but those who smiled to your face while digging your grave. But she also knew something else, that this time she wouldn't be alone. As she got off at the stop on her street, her phone rang. An unknown number. Hello? Ms. Miller, this is Henry Washington. Do you have time for a brief conversation tomorrow morning, before the start of the normal workday? Claire's heart pounded nervously. Of course, Mr. Washington. What time? 7:30, my office. This will be an unofficial conversation. After he hung up, Claire stood for a moment at the bus stop, listening to the sounds of the city at night. An unofficial conversation at 7:30 in the morning? It could mean everything or nothing. In her small apartment at the kitchen table, Claire watched the flickering light from her neighbor's TV through the thin wall. Tomorrow, she would find out if her time at Washington and Partners was ending, or if it was just beginning. The next morning, she was at the office by 7:15. Mr. George, the security guard, looked surprised. Early today, Miss Miller. Meeting with the director. Ah, important business. He nodded. Good luck. Henry was waiting for her in his office with 2 cups of coffee. That was the first thing that shocked her, that the CEO had prepared coffee for his subordinate. Please sit down, he said, gesturing to the armchair opposite his desk. Coffee, thank you. Henry sat not behind his desk, but in the other armchair facing her. This change in spacing made the conversation feel less formal, but also more unsettling. Claire, he began, using her first name for the first time, I'm going to be honest with you, the board is pressuring me to fire you. Claire set her cup on the table, afraid her hands would start to shake. Why? Because you represent everything they're afraid of, Henry said, looking out the window at the waking city. You're proof that their children, with their expensive schools and connections, are not irreplaceable. That talent and determination can mean more than pedigree. But I'm just doing my job. That's precisely why they're terrified. Henry smiled bitterly. You know what Zachary Newman, the main shareholder, told me yesterday? That hiring you was a dangerous social precedent, that if others find out you can rise from the social margins, our exclusive environment will lose its standing. Claire listened in silence, feeling anger build inside her. Not anger at Henry, but at the system that treated her life's chances as a dangerous precedent. What do you plan to do? She asked. I don't know. Henry shook his head. I'm trying to buy time, but I need concrete results. Something so spectacular that no one can question your competence. I understand. Claire, Henry leaned forward, I have to confess something. When you first started here, I thought of this as an experiment. I wanted to see whether someone from a completely different background could succeed in our environment. That was unfair to you, and I apologize for it. Claire looked at him, processing what she had heard. Part of her wanted to stand up, tell him exactly what she thought of his experiments, and walk out with her head held high. But another part understood that honesty, even uncomfortable honesty, was rare in this world. And now? She asked. Now I see that it wasn't an experiment. It was the best personnel decision I've made in 5 years of leading this company. Claire stood up from the armchair. Mr. Washington, Henry, she said, using his first name for the first time. Give me those 2 weeks, but on one condition. What's that? Judge me by my results, not my background, and don't defend me from them. She gestured toward the door where the board members had stood. I'll defend myself. Henry shook her hand. Deal. As Claire left the office at 8 a.m., the office was already buzzing with life. At her desk, the first surprise of the day was waiting for her. A stack of documents and a note from Veronica. Urgent. To be reviewed by end of day. If you have questions, please do not disturb me before 3 p.m. Claire looked through the documents. They were contracts with 3 of the firm's most important clients, full of legal jargon and financial details that required meticulous analysis. A week's worth of work, not a single day's. But Claire was no longer under any illusions. She knew this wasn't a test of her competence. It was the first step in the carefully choreographed downfall of her career. She sat down at her computer, pushed up the sleeves of her blouse, and began to read the first contract. She had a long day ahead of her, but she also had something she didn't have before, the knowledge of who her real opponent was, and an ally who wouldn't let her fight alone. Chapter 6. The week that followed her conversation with Henry was the calm before the storm. Claire worked 14-hour days, analyzing the contracts Veronica had given her. Each document was a labyrinth of legal phrases and financial details, but slowly she began to understand the logic that governed them. On Friday evening, when she was alone in the office with Martin, who was updating software, her phone rang. An unknown number from Germany. Hello, hier ist Klaus Bergmann von Schneider Investments, a man's voice said in German. Could I speak with the person responsible for international contracts? Claire hesitated for a moment. Her German was good. She had learned it in high school and perfected it by watching movies with subtitles. But should she be taking calls about international contracts? This is Claire Miller, she finally said in German. Ms. Miller, I'm calling about the contract from this past March. Our companies were supposed to collaborate on an investment in housing projects in Boston. But for 3 months we haven't been able to get any information on the progress. Claire quickly opened the system and searched for the Schneider Investments contract. It was one of the documents Veronica had told her to review. The contract value, €1.5 million. Mr. Bergman, I will look into this immediately and call you back within the hour, she said. After he hung up, Claire frantically searched through the documents. Finally, she found what she was looking for, and a chill ran down her spine. The contract with Schneider Investments had been suspended since April due to a flawed financial risk analysis, and the person listed as responsible for the error was her. Martin, she called out across the office. He came running immediately. What's going on? I need your help, right now. They spent the next 3 hours scouring the company's systems. Martin recovered deleted files, checked system logs, and reconstructed the history of changes in the documents. Claire translated all the emails from Schneider Investments from German. "I've got it," Martin said finally, pointing at the screen. The original correspondence from March. It was Veronica who led the negotiations with the German firm. It was her who proposed the investment strategy that failed. And then, in April, she changed all the documents to make it look like the mistake was yours. But I wasn't even working here then. Exactly. It was her planning error. She didn't account for the Germans calling directly. Claire felt adrenaline course through her veins. For the first time in weeks, she had the upper hand on Veronica. "What do we do?" she asked. "You call Mr. Bergman back and explain the whole situation. Tell him the truth, that there was a misunderstanding in the documentation, but that the firm is ready to return to negotiations. And if Veronica finds out, it'll be too late." Martin smiled. "Germans are a nation that appreciates honesty and efficiency. If you solve their problem, they'll become your allies." At 7:30 p.m., Claire called Klaus Bergman. The conversation lasted an hour. She explained the entire situation, without directly accusing Veronica, but clearly indicating where the mistake had occurred. At the end, she proposed a meeting the following week to resume talks. "Ms. Miller," Bergman said before ending the call, "I very much appreciate your honesty. It's so rare these days to meet people who admit to their mistakes and try to fix them instead of hiding them." On Monday morning, everything exploded. Veronica walked into the office at 8:15 with the look of someone who had discovered a betrayal in her own home. She went straight to Claire's desk. "Ms. Miller, my office, now." Everyone in the office stopped working and watched as Claire followed Veronica. The tension was palpable. "Sit down," Veronica said, slamming the door behind them. "Can you explain to me why Klaus Bergman from Schneider Investments called Henry this morning and talked about a very productive conversation with you?" "Because I spoke with him on Friday," Claire replied calmly. "You spoke with our international client without my permission?" Veronica's voice rose with every word. "He called with questions about the contract. I answered them." "You answered them?" Veronica sat behind her desk, looking at Claire like a criminal. "Ms. Miller, do you realize that contact with international clients requires special authorization? That every word you said to that man could have exposed the company to losses, but it didn't. On the contrary, Mr. Bergman wants to resume negotiations." Veronica stood up abruptly. "That is the last thing you should be deciding. Do you understand that this contract was suspended due to complex financial problems? Problems that arose because of a flawed analysis that you prepared?" "I didn't prepare any analysis in March," Claire said, looking Veronica straight in the eye. "I wasn't working at this company in March." Fear flickered in Veronica's eyes for a moment, but she quickly hid it. "Of course not. It was a pre-employment consultation. Mr. Washington had you prepare a sample analysis as part of the recruitment process." The lie was so blatant that Claire almost smiled. "Ms. Miller," Veronica continued, "you are fired, effective immediately. The reason? Exceeding your authority and exposing the company to financial losses. Can I appeal this to Mr. Washington?" "You can, but it won't change the decision. Mr. Washington has already been informed of your unprofessional behavior." Claire stood up from her chair. "I understand. May I collect my personal belongings from my desk?" "Of course, you have 5 minutes." As Claire walked back to the 26th floor, all the employees watched her expectantly. News traveled fast in the company. At her desk, she saw Martin discreetly working at the computer next to hers. "Martin," she whispered, "I need your help. What's happening?" "Veronica fired me. I have 5 minutes to pack my things, but I need you to send one email for me." "To whom?" "To Henry. Write that I have documents related to the Schneider Investments contract that may be important for the firm, and that I'll be waiting in the parking lot in front of the building for the next hour." Martin nodded and started typing. Claire packed her few belongings, a pen, a notebook, the small photograph of her mother she kept in her drawer. As she carried the box out of the office, she said a silent goodbye to the place that had, for a short time, been her professional home. She was in the parking lot by 9:30. The November wind was cold, but Claire didn't feel it. She was focused on what would happen in the next few minutes. Henry appeared 10 minutes later, walking out of the building at a brisk pace. "Claire, what happened?" "I got a message about some documents." "Henry," she interrupted him, "before I say anything, I need to know. Do you really want to know the truth, or do you prefer to believe Veronica's version?" Henry looked at her intently. "I want the truth." Claire handed him the flash drive. "The original documents concerning the Schneider Investments contract and 3 other projects. Compare the dates, the authors, the system logs, and then you can decide if the experiment is over or if the real game has just begun. Henry took the flash drive but continued to look at her. And you? What will you do now? Claire looked up at the building where, for 2 weeks, she had felt at home, and she smiled. I'll be looking for a job, again, but this time with the knowledge that I can compete at any level. At 2 o'clock that same day, her phone rang. Claire, it's Henry. Can you come back to the office? What for? Veronica King is no longer with our firm, and I need a director of client development. It's a position 2 levels above the one you were fired from. The salary is $9,000 a month, plus bonuses, a company car, and a budget for your own team. Are you interested? Claire stood at a bus stop on the south side, listening to an offer she hadn't dared to dream of even in her wildest fantasies. And what would my first project be? She asked. The Open Door program, Henry said. A recruitment system for people without connections, without prestigious schools, without a safety net. You'll be looking for hidden talent all over the country. People like you. Claire was silent for a moment, watching the pedestrians on her street, people tired after work rushing home to small apartments, to problems the big world ignores. Henry, she said finally, I accept the offer, but on one condition. What's that? I want to stay who I am. I don't want to become someone who forgets where she came from. I don't want success to turn me into a person who looks down on others. Meaning? It means I'll take the bus to work instead of the company car. That I'll keep living in my small apartment on the south side, not in a condo in Lincoln Park, and that my team will be made up of people who, like me, had to fight for every chance they got. Henry was silent for a long moment. Claire, he said at last, do you realize that your attitude is extraordinary? Why? Because most people who reach a certain position want to forget where they were before. They want to be accepted by those above them, instead of remembering those who were left behind. Maybe that's why the business world is so detached from reality, Claire replied. Maybe that's why companies lose touch with their customers. As she rode home on the number 6 bus, the same one she had been riding for years, Claire watched the people around her. A construction worker with a bandaged hand, returning from a 12-hour shift. A young mother with a child in her arms, exhausted after a day spent navigating bureaucracy. An elderly man in a worn coat, reading a newspaper by the light of his phone. The world of big business didn't see these people, but Claire saw them, because she was one of them, and she knew that even in a glass tower she could never forget who she really was. The next day, her first as Director of Client Development, Claire walked through the office in the same white blouse she had worn to her first interview. Not because she couldn't afford a new one, she could now, but because she wanted to remember. Her new office was on the 27th floor, with a window overlooking all of Chicago, but the first thing she did was call Martin. Martin, do you want to be my deputy? Your deputy? But I'm just from IT. You'll be the Deputy Director of Client Development, specializing in technological solutions. Salary of $8,000 a month, plus bonuses, plus the opportunity to implement all the systems you've been dreaming of for the last 5 years. A long pause. Claire, why? Because I believe the best ideas come from people who have been invisible long enough to truly observe and understand. The first project for Claire's team was indeed the Open Door program. They traveled all over the country, to small towns, to community colleges, to community centers and unemployment offices. They looked for people with talent and determination, but without connections. 6 months later, Washington and Partners had the best client satisfaction rate in the industry and a team of employees that came from every corner of the country. The firm now employed a former nurse from Milwaukee who became their top medical technology analyst, a former mechanic from Detroit who had a genius for understanding the automotive industry, a former teacher from a small town in rural Illinois who spoke 5 languages and took over all international communications. Claire often remembered her grandmother Helen's words, "The brightest diamonds are found in the mud," but now she knew something more, that once you find the diamond, you can't forget the mud it came from. Because that mud, that difficult path, that daily struggle, that's what makes the diamond shine so brightly. At the annual board meeting, 2 years after she had first run barefoot into the company building, Claire presented the firm's results. A 70% increase in clientele, a 300% increase in client satisfaction, a 50% increase in profits. "How is this possible?" asked Zachary Newman, the same man who 2 years earlier had called her a dangerous social precedent. "Because we stopped hiring people who look like us," Claire replied calmly, "and we started hiring people who think like our clients." After the meeting, when they were alone in the conference room, Henry walked over to the window. "Claire, do you ever regret not taking the easier path, not agreeing to become who they wanted you to be?" Claire stood beside him, looking out at the city sprawling below. Somewhere out there, On the south side, her old neighbor, Mrs. Stella, still lived, a woman who had worked in a factory for 40 years and never had a chance for advancement. Somewhere out there were dozens of other girls, like she had been 2 years ago, hungry for a chance that no one wanted to see. Never, she said, because now I know that the most important thing isn't the destination, but never forgetting the road you traveled to get there. And you haven't forgotten. Claire reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, worn photograph, the same one she had kept on her desk for 2 years, a picture of her mother in a janitor's uniform, smiling despite her exhaustion. She cleaned offices in buildings like this for 20 years, she said quietly. She could never sit at these desks, but she always told me that one day her daughter would, and that when I finally sat behind that desk, I had to remember all the other mothers who are still cleaning these offices at night. Henry nodded. That's why the Open Door program is so important to you. It's not a program, Claire corrected him. It's justice. Delayed, but not denied. As she rode the number 6 bus home that evening, Claire looked out at the city and thought about how much had changed and how much had remained the same. She still lived in the same apartment, still rode the same bus, still carried the same photograph of her mother in her pocket. But now, alongside that photograph, she also carried the names and stories of hundreds of people who, thanks to the Open Door program, had been given the chance that no one else would give them. And that, she knew, was worth more than all the money and prestige in the world. A message from Klaus Bergman appeared on her phone. Ms. Miller, thanks to our collaboration, both our firms are prospering. But more importantly, you have restored my faith in honest business. Thank you. Claire smiled, looking out at the lights of the Chicago night. Sometimes the most important victories aren't recorded in financial reports. Sometimes the most important thing is managing to hold on to your humanity in a world that has turned it into a luxury good. And sometimes, with enough hard work and a little bit of luck, the girl who once ran barefoot through the city streets can not only achieve success but also remain herself.